Hey everybody, it's Jim Martin. Today, I want to talk about what's going on in Venezuela. You may have recently heard of elections which seemingly promised to deliver a couple of new leaders in Venezuela, which then turned out to reinforce the power of the existing leader of Venezuela, Maduro. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to share a little bit of context first. Venezuela is a really interesting place in that it declared independence from Spain in like 1830. So it's been an independent country for a really long time. They went through a series of governments for a long time, and in about 1958 or so, they transitioned to a more or less democratic state and really made a lot of progress on that front up through the late 80s. At that point, confluence of bad things happened. They'd properly developed petrochemicals industry. Venezuela has huge oil and natural gas reserves, but they were suffering from the costs of being an international supplier of something like that and not having really developed their economy in any other way. They also had a lot of infighting amongst elites and entered a pretty tumultuous, yet still democratic phase of politics in that time frame. In the early 90s, there was a coup attempt by Hugo Chavez, where he kind of walked out of this coup attempt with his reputation more than intact and kind of reinforced. And then he transitioned into being a conventional politician and ran for president later in that decade. And he won fairly decisively. At that point, he seemed like a conventional person. Venezuela was an ally of the United States, had a lot of relationships with business, economics, security interests, and so forth. But he rapidly began to change things. He called this the Bolivarian Revolution, and he actually had a referendum on creating a new constitution, which gave him a lot more power. And he had a very charismatic guy, very smart. He just basically ended up, over the next 5 or 6 years, really consolidating power around himself, nationalizing a bunch of industries, cutting off most relations with the United States, and setting himself up. And he accomplished this through a lot of patronage. So they would go out and seize various estates from wealthy folks and others and turn those over to followers that were loyal to him. And this continued. At one point, Venezuela had independent courts. There was a big battle with that, which actually, if I remember right, involved the security forces. Democracy died a few years into his regime. There were protests, those were put down, but in general, most people in Venezuela at the time were very supportive of him. Fast forward, they run into some serious problems, again, because of their over-reliance on petroleum exports as the sole vehicle for economics in Venezuela when oil prices declined. When you focus so much on one industry and that industry's floor falls out internationally, there's not a lot you can do. Leading him to make some relationships with Cuba and Russia, a number of other folks that were a little less, had a few less scruples than we did. Sometime in that period of time, the United States started to impose sanctions on the Venezuelan regime. Prior to that, the damage was almost kind of already done, though, and the economy was rapidly in decline. He passed away in 2013, and Nicolas Maduro was interim president and then was elected president soon thereafter. At this point, their elections are more for show than anything, although serious opposition did exist. During Maduro, hyperinflation sets in, all kinds of rough stuff starts happening. You start to see a lot of emigration where people are just fleeing the country. This starts in countries like Venezuela with the people who have money and can get out, and then the middle classes go, and then you don't have a whole lot of people left with the means to do that. Yet they still try to get out through the Darien Gap, through Trinidad and Tobago, elsewhere, producing, I think, something like 7 or 8 million refugees from a country, I think, is about 30 million people. Rough stuff, right? There has been resistance. Some of that has been violent, and the military has squashed it. Maduro, Chavez before him, Maduro had ensured through systems of patronage that the military would stay loyal to him. There was yet another election here recently in July, and I saw a speech from him where he talked about, we have the support of the people and we've got the support of the army, kind of in that sort of tone, just sort of setting it up like, you might not want to get out there and try to protest. From what can be gleaned, if the votes were accurately counted, he would have lost dramatically. I think something like 80% of the votes seemed to have been cast for Maduro's opponents. However, he won by a similar margin, amazingly enough. They faked the whole show, and they wouldn't allow international observers and all these things. Most recently, he's been rounding up the people that were running against him and throwing them in jail, which is, again, pretty much the tactics of a despot. Now, their economy is recovered slightly from the really bad times in like 2019, 20 into the pandemic, but it's not good. Basic goods and services are difficult to come by. Food, medicine, hospitals don't have enough, doctors don't have enough medical supplies, all these sorts of things, which concerns all of their neighbors because they're producing tons of refugees, primarily for Colombia. He also has threatened Guyana, I believe, which is one of his neighbors, citing some kind of historical injustice claim or something. What can be done about this? Well, not a lot. Generally speaking, when somebody has that hold on power and they have those circles of people at the top that control the oil industry, which he does, the military, which he does, transportation, and so forth, he's got all these things locked down with people that are loyal to him. And he has enough money to be able to pay them off. He doesn't really care what happens elsewhere. And despite many insinuations that the United States has been involved in a variety of efforts to overthrow Chavez and then Maduro, I doubt that the United States was involved in efforts to overthrow Chavez. However, the United States has kind of moved from this position of ally, concerned ally, benign neglect during the Obama administration to opposition in the latter years of Obama and into the Trump and Biden administration. So we don't have a lot of influence there. At any rate, there's not a lot that the United States can do or really anybody else. This is kind of an internal Venezuelan thing where, if the military rises up and decides that Maduro is no longer serving their needs, then that might happen. But otherwise, in terms of foreign interventions of any kind, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It's really just a sad situation to see a country that was in the 70s kind of a model of democracy in the developing world turn into this. That's what I've got to share on that situation. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.